Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of the Lancaster Ave Scoop here on Mainline TV. Glad to be back with my first episode in 2025. In case you missed the first episode, my name is David Szczepanski. I'm a junior at Villanova and WXVU Student Radio Sports Director. Throughout the next 30 minutes, I'll discuss Villanova community news and Villanova sports. I'll also interview a special guest. Today's interview will be with Nick Langan, a staff writer for Radio World Magazine and a faculty advisor for 89.1 WXVU Radio. Let's get started with our campus community news. At the beginning of this semester in January, V Sushi became the newest addition to Villanova's on-campus dining options. Located inside Cafe Nova, also known as Cova, in Doherty Hall, V Sushi serves fresh sushi options including California and shrimp tempura rolls. In other community news, last Thursday, January 30th, Philadelphia Phillies legend, broadcaster, and Wall of Famer John Kruk spoke to dozens of fans, students, faculty, and community members at the Reverend John Stack Leadership Series panel. Before a live Q&A and panel conversation, Kruk met with fans at a social event held in the President's Lounge. The main discussion was held in the Villanova Room in the Connolly Center. The event was organized by the Campus Activities Team, the Office of Student Involvement, and the Stack family. The Leadership Series was created to honor the life and legacy of Reverend John P. Stack, a 1971 graduate of Villanova and an Augustinian priest ordained in May of 1974. Stack passed away in October 2022 at the age of 75. Now for some Villanova sports news. Villanova men's basketball suffered its fifth loss in its last 6 games on Saturday, February 1st at the Wells Fargo Center. Creighton defeated Villanova 62-60 on a Stephen Ashworth game-winning 3 with 5 seconds remaining. Wooga Poplar scored 24 points for Villanova, and Eric Dixon finished the game with 17 points in 38 minutes. Dixon's 17-point performance against the Blue Jays pushed him over the 2,000-point mark in his college career. He became just the 12th player in school history across both men's and women's programs to reach 2,000 career points. Dixon currently stands at 2,008 points, ranking him 9th in program scoring history. He is 16 points away from tying John Pannone for 8th place. He is also currently 235 points away from tying Kerry Kittles for 1st place in Villanova men's basketball scoring history. Dixon was also named to the 2024-25 Oscar Robertson Trophy midseason list, so a lot of accolades for Eric Dixon. Meanwhile, the women's basketball team continues to play good basketball over the last month. The Cats have won 4 of their last 5 games, including a 65-53 win over Marquette on Sunday. Brona Power Cassidy was named to the Big East Weekly Honor Roll on Monday afternoon. She scored 14 points, including 9 points in the first quarter against the Golden Eagles. It marked the 4th consecutive week with a Wildcat on the Weekly Honor Roll for Big East women's basketball. You can listen to all Villanova men's and women's basketball games on WXVU 89.1 The Roar Student Radio. Today's interview will be with Nick Langan, who is here to talk about WXVU and his passion for radio. Hello, Nick. Welcome to the Lancaster Ave Scoop. Glad to have you join me. How are you doing today?
David, that's what we call in the business a smooth segue. Well done, well done. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for asking me. I'm thrilled and honored to be here with you.
Nick, I know that you've had such an impact on so many students at Villanova that have, had an interest for radio, wanted to get involved in journalism, or, DJs hosting a show. You've had such an impact on me, and I think your story is very inspiring for students who want to get involved in radio, get involved in journalism. So I want to start with your student experience. And you had an interesting one at Rutgers as well, eventually at Villanova. Can you just tell our listeners, our viewers out there, what was your college experience like?
I think, I hope it's, telling us is inspirational for people in a way. I think to cut to the chase, it doesn't always happen, traditionally. And so I started, this was, 2004, at Rutgers Camden. And I knew I always wanted to work in radio. I'll tell you about one experience that sort of reinforced that prior when I was a bit younger. But I wanted to be, back then I wanted to be on the radio. That was my dream. And so I started out at Rutgers Camden as a communications student, although they didn't have a communications program, so that was part of the issue. But whether it was my high school experience, I'm not quite sure, but I sort of had the idea college wasn't for me. So I went for a couple of years and I stopped. I got involved, I actually interned at WJJZ. They used to be the smooth jazz radio station. We'll talk about my love of smooth jazz too, I think.
Yes, we will. That's coming up.
Obsession. So I stopped and I sort of, I didn't apply myself. Some of it was very much me, but I also, I guess, and I've learned now, whether you're too young, I respect students like you so much, and other students I've gotten to work at Villanova with, that I don't want to say have it all figured out, but they are mature enough to take advantage of what college has to offer at age 20. For whatever the reason, maybe social insecurities, that was sort of a big thing. I was sort of an introvert, and I feel like we could do a whole separate show on this. I think it's possible for an introvert to become external. Like that's, I feel like I've learned that people aren't so bad. So the first college experience didn't go well. I dropped out, whatever you want to say. I worked a few radio jobs, just loosely helping a gentleman with his internet station who used to be part of WJJZ, Michael Tazia. I'll give him a shout out. I worked an IT job for a while, for a few years. Finally, mid-2018, the IT job, I learned so many valuable lessons with customer service, and it wasn't quite where I wanted to be. So I applied for Villanova's College Professional Studies program, which basically allows a lot of working professionals to take courses at night. I took a full load of daytime courses at age 32. And so here I was after working, and I'm thrown in a classroom with just true freshmen. That was a very, I guess you'd say humbling, but just an experience, until you go through it, it's hard to describe. And so I was scared at first. As a matter of fact, I'll never forget, this was in September 2018, right down the road from our studios here, Manila's Diner. I was in the parking lot. Remember,
fantastic food.
Oh, Manila's buffalo chicken salad. You gotta have it. I'm dreaming about it right now. And I was crying in the car. True story. I was like, what am I doing with my life? I'm who am I fooling? I'm going back to school. I'm in my 30s. Like, where did I go wrong? But it was kind of at that moment where I was like, you know what? Let's just roll with it and see. If this semester is a complete disaster, then we'll call it a day and find an IT job or something. Not that, and I don't want to demean IT jobs. I think they're extremely important. But it was just not where I needed to be. Lo and behold, I sort of found my way. I credit the CPS program at Villanova so much in making me, what I became, I feel like, in the last few years. And you're never a finished product, that's for sure. So that adult student experience, to answer your question, and I saw these classes, I was that guy who would ask questions, who would sit in the front row. The other students were like, probably like, will this Nick just shut up? But I took so much more. I feel so lucky, so privileged, whatever you want to say, that I had that opportunity later in life as a CPS student. Then I got my master's in software engineering. Like, if you asked me in 2018, I didn't even have a degree. Like, I would be a master's student. It's been an amazing process. I'm grateful to Villanova. And one thing I would say, anybody watching at home, if you ever think you're too old or if you're on the fence, college is different for everybody. I don't want to say everybody needs it, but higher education later in life can be very meaningful.
Yeah, I always like that story, Nick, because it really shows, I think, how college doesn't have to be traditional, right? You get out of high school, go right into college, and there's different, ways that people can get involved in taking classes. So I appreciate you sharing that with us. What made you fall in love with radio? Of course, now being an advisor with WXVU, we'll get to your other work in radio coming up in a little bit, but how much has it also impacted your life?
I would, I'd first credit my dad, who I lost last year. So, it's been a lot of mixed feelings the last year. But he had a collection of shortwave portable radios. I grew up in Ohio, but all my family's from Jersey, so we eventually came back. And I just sort of took to those portable radios and carried them wherever I went. Then I got a police scanner. Police scanners are awesome. I still use them. age 12, we were living in New Jersey now, in Florence, right across the Delaware River. My dad got me a 1-watt FM transmitter for my 12th birthday. I already knew at the time, so there is if people want to check out the FCC rule book, there is the Part 15 FCC rules. You can transmit on the FM or the AM without a license. It just has to be at a very, very low power. It can't go, beyond like your driveway, theoretically. 1 watt of power with an antenna mounted on our house at the time, went a good mile or two. Like we got out to like the Pennsylvania Turnpike extension, I remember. I thought it was so cool. I knew it was over the limit. My dad, God love him, I guess he didn't. So like 4 years on and off, I broadcast WNJL. That was my radio station out of my bedroom. I was, in my glory. I'll never forget a September afternoon in 2001. I was a sophomore in high school by then. My mom comes upstairs. She says, "Nick, there's these 2 agents at the door. They want to see your transmitter." And I was like, oh no. It can't be. It can't be. 2 agents from the FCC, their Philadelphia bureau. They may still be there today. They were very nice about it. They just said, we detected an unlicensed signal broadcasting on 106.5 at the time. You can't be broadcasting. You don't have a license. You got to turn it off. I was devastated. I was crushed. But maybe in a moment that I feel like has, explained some things maybe about me since. Say 12 days later, I pivoted, as they say in the business, to streaming, to internet radio. I want to say it was, maybe a little ahead of the curve. There were streaming stations in 2001, but not the proliferation that we see today. And that's where WNJL.com radio was born. That actually is still on the air. I heard from somebody who streamed WNJL stationed in Afghanistan in 2007, who remembered it and asked me to bring it back. And so this past summer I did WNJL.com for smooth jazz. So it sort of ties into the fact, it's just been a passion for me, and I feel like the longer I am on this planet Earth, if you can work, if you're lucky enough, because obviously not everybody is, if you're lucky enough to work in something you're passionate about, boy, that'll take you a long way.
Well, now the FCC story is out there.
It is documented. I did it. I confess. That's.
But I'm curious, Nick, what was going through your head as a 12-year-old kid at that time, right? You have 2 FCC agents at your door. What was kind of the thought process at the time when your mom calls you down?
I think it should have been like, are we going to get, are there going to be a monetary forfeiture? Are we going to have to pay a fine? I think selfishly it was, oh no, like this is the end. Like I'm not going to be able to play smooth jazz on 106.5 anymore. That's because I kind of, once they're there, and I actually remember the morning after, I emailed the agent and I asked him, could I do one last broadcast just to say goodbye? My legions of fans. I don't know if anybody was listening. And he said, no, we can't let you do that. So I was more so just, this thing that I love that, I feel like I had a hard time in high school, fitting in, not to go through the whole, but, high school, I think it's some people love it, some people don't. I was in the latter. Radio was that outlet for me, particularly to have it in my bedroom. And that's, I'm very thankful to my parents for shepherding my interests and putting up with my interests. But it was more so just the ability to not do it anymore, I think was what I was, because they were nice about it. Now you hear some horror stories, pirate radio operations, there's a lot in the New York area, there are a lot in the Boston area. I will say, shout out to the Philadelphia FCC office, they're pretty strict around here, so maybe it was luck of the draw, but just more being crushed, the high school boy, I guess you might say, who can't do radio anymore. But I rebounded.
Sure, I can imagine you were pretty crushed by that, as it was, a big passion of yours. So as we kind of transition over to student radio now, how did you get involved with student radio, specifically at Villanova with WXVU, but were you involved with student radio either at Rutgers or, when you were at Villanova coming as a new student?
That's a great question. I never did at Rutgers Camden. They may have had a small station, but nothing licensed. So not in my first time. So when I came to Villanova in 2018, 2010, I knew of WXVU just because I knew, I try to follow the local radio scene. But to be honest with you, I thought I was too old to like volunteer, north of 30, like what do they need, me around. But the advisor to WXVU at a time, a shout out to Dina Lay, she came to my audio production class, a great class I took in the communications department because I did a comm minor at Villanova. And she came and spoke. It was fall 2019, just talking about Villanova's media programs. Now, Dina does side voiceovers. She has a great radio voice, great announcing voice. That's what she mentioned when she talked to my class. So that's what I sent her an email. Dina, could I talk to you about doing voiceovers? I had been interested in doing that. When I met with her, she happened to mention, hey, I oversee WXVU. We need a music director. They didn't have a student music director at the time. And, I said, you sure? Is that okay? She's like, no. So credit to Dina, credit to the Office of Student Involvement. Now Kat Coyle works there, awesome advisor to WXVU and all the media programs for being open to the non-traditional students, because that's the only way. There are so many, you want to look, chain of events that have happened since that wouldn't have happened. So I joined in 2019 as a student, as a non-traditional student, and I've latched on since. I created my radio show, the Lancaster Avenue Oasis.
Very close.
The sister program for what you're doing here. And I think it reinvigorated my love of radio and also the smooth jazz interest as well. Because I did internet radio, but to me, David, there's still something special about over-the-air broadcast radio. A lot of people thought by 2025 it would be a thing of the past, and I'm not saying millions and millions of young people flock to it, but it's still, we do stories in Radio World, we'll talk about Radio World all the time. It's still a live and local medium, at least if it's executed in that fashion. So, and college radio, I think, is where it can really shine. So I was so grateful to reawaken that in myself. And as a result, I stayed connected as a grad student, and now advising the future of the station like you. Getting to meet you was incredible. And also working with our nursing students at WXVU, which I was just doing today as well.
Well, thank you for the compliment, Nick. It's been an honor to get to know you as well. And I like that you talked about how WXVU gave you an opportunity to get on air and broadcast and work with people legally. I will add that was
legally. That's you can't go after me for that. That's right. That's right.
So transitioning to the whole license situation with WXVU during COVID, it was sharing the license with Cabrini. It was kind of going half. Every week it would split the time that it was on air. But you and Dina Lee, who we talked about just a few minutes ago, came together to save the license and give Villanova full-time FCC priority in August of 2022. What was this process like, and how happy were you to be able to save WXVU for the future generations of Villanova college students?
Yeah, I think, telling that story, it would be impossible to tell it without Dr. Carol Weingarten. Who is a nursing professor at Villanova. And it just so happened she had radio experience back when she was a student at Columbia U in New York City. They have WKCR up there. And so she was looking for a health promotion rotation she could do under the Office of Student Involvement, and JJ Brown, the head of student involvement at the time, I think, steered her toward radio. So she started bringing her nursing students in with WXVU to create these public service announcements and now podcasts. And when she heard specifically that the license was, basically at the time, I think there was a groundswell to see what the FM license could fetch on the open market. That is something that has happened at a lot of different universities. And so, with the support of Dr. Weingarten and with the support of Dina, who was sort of able to facilitate Dr. Weingarten's requests and put them to what the university could act on, basically, it sort of did a 180 from WXVU possibly going internet only, to buying that other half of the Cabrini timeshare so that, as you alluded to, David, as opposed to Tuesday and Thursday and Saturday, WXVU gets the frequency, which is very convoluted, like from a listener perspective. How are you supposed to tell people who are listening in the main line to W289.1, you can listen on these days, and Cabrini's WYBF gets the other days? Very confusing. That was eliminated, and I think it was, just it solidified the commitment that Villanova had in WXVU, but just how meaningful the support from nursing was. So a huge shout out to nursing. That's really how that came about. And so, for me, just getting to witness it over the last, now it's been 5 years, you see a program that was sort of, in many ways kind of an afterthought to now where it's really student driven. And that's the key. Like you can, now that I'm, past my prime as a student, although, never say never, it's not about me. It's about you traveling to Madison Square Garden and having a crew not only broadcast the men's games, but the women's games each and every time out at the Finn, Wells Fargo Center, having an active exec board, keeping our content up to date with so many shows just this semester. That's what it's all about. And so to be able to witness that transformation, it's been very gratifying for me, believing that radio does matter here at Villanova. But I think it all started with getting that full-time license, because I still think that's very meaningful.
Well, you mentioned a little bit, now working with students as WXVU advisor, specifically with the nursing program, which has been nominated for and won many radio awards. What has been your experience with WXVU recently, and how much does it mean to you to see the hard work of students, specifically in the nursing program, pay off with these awards?
Yeah, each and every, twice each spring semester, the nursing students come through. It's called WXVU Health. And for me, it's just sharing knowledge, like what makes a good public service announcement. Because, on non-commercial radio, on college stations, you can't do just straight advertisements. You can't do calls to action. There's a whole, debate on exactly what constitutes that. It's a slippery slope. You've got to play it safe. So I try to use my interests to talk to them. And it's really cool. In 5 weeks, they go from never recording to producing these public service announcements that have gained national attention. We'll be at the Intercollegiate Broadcast Systems Conference in New York at the beginning of March. We've done well there the last few years. So it makes me very happy to see in, again, the course of 5 weeks, senior nursing students go from basically no experience to producing really high-quality PSAs informing about different health topics that affect Villanova students, people here in the main line. So to have just even a little part of that is very gratifying to me.
Well, at the end of 2024, in December, you started your new job with Radio World as a staff writer. What do you do in this role, and what is it like to write and work in radio, a passion of yours, as you said, since you were a teenager, going back with the FCC agent story? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, now that they know the FCC story, I don't know if they can renege that deal.
The secret is out there. So.
No, I've talked with other broadcast engineers who have had similar stories. I think it comes with the territory. Try to push the limits. The radio world has been, I know it sounds corny, but sort of like living a dream. And it all started for my graduate thesis here at Villanova. I had to build a software application. In shocking news, I did one related to radio. It's called Radio Land. I invite anybody at home to download it on their iOS or Android devices. The whole concept is wherever you're at in North America, whatever location, you can search for a location. What FM stations could I hear if I went out to the parking lot here and turned on my radio? That was the whole concept. And so after I completed it, which I'm very proud of, I wanted to see if any of the radio trade publications, as they're known as, might accept, if I could run an advertisement for it. So I wrote Paul McLean, the editor-in-chief of Radio World. He's been there since the 90s. And he thought it was such an interesting product. He wanted to do a story for it for Radio World magazine, which I knew of. And lo and behold, I think it was December 22, or it was on the cover. So how cool was that? That itself was a dream. Well, I guess he liked my responses to his queries. He pitched the idea, would you like to do some freelancing for us? So since then, I had been doing an occasional column here or there. He particularly liked a story I did on what radio was doing to sort of fulfill the needs in North Carolina with the terrible flooding they had post-Hurricane Helene this past fall. Long story short, that led to a position opening, and in December I accepted it full-time as a staff writer there. So my day-to-day is just whatever's going on in the radio industry. The audience leans technical, but it could be decision makers, it could just be hobbyists, anything from Nielsen ratings to a really interesting study that was just done on how engine noise affects AM radio. That's been a big topic. Running the gamut for articles both in print. We do 26 print issues per year, but also radioworld.com and our free daily email newsletter. So I feel really lucky. It's been great. And it's really, something about David writing for the WXVU website and what you'll be doing. It's a challenge to create good content and try to find angles that other people aren't doing, because there are other radio websites, other good radio websites. I never may have thought of myself as like a natural writer, but I think it's been very invigorating. So I look forward to doing a bunch more stories for years and years to come on the great medium of radio.
That's awesome. Congratulations on the new position, Nick. You talked about it also a little bit earlier with jazz music and your passion for that growing up, and you're also in the process of, in the works of writing a jazz book. So can you just speak a little bit about, how jazz music has really impacted your life, and, out of all genres, how jazz music has, become your favorite over the years?
Man, yeah, you're teeing me up, David. That's I love it. Smooth jazz. It is, so like the poster child is Kenny G, the GOAT. There was a documentary on Kenny G that HBO ran, I want to say in 2021. Around the 15-minute mark, my mom and I, waiting for Kenny G outside the Blue Note in New York City in 2019, made a cameo. That is my greatest life accomplishment to date. But smooth jazz, I've just, growing up, a combination of my dad, he liked sort of like the new age piano music. You got your Yannis, David Lons, Enya, that whole scene, which back then was part of the smooth jazz radio format. And then my mom would drive around with like cassettes of like a George Benson and Earl Klugh, people like that. And it just sort of stuck, and that, it became maybe sort of just to please them at first, but somewhere along the line, I started deciding I like this music a lot. And so I became obsessed with it. So when I say I wanted to work for a radio station, it was a smooth jazz station, and in a way I sort of got to fulfill that, because shout out to WJJZ when they were on the air here in Philly for 13 years. I was able to intern there while I was at Rutgers Camden. I got a board op job there. I never got to go on the air. They changed format in 2006, but my love for smooth jazz never died. And so I credit, like the whole WXVU experience, I never would have thought to start doing this. In 2021, because now, most of the smooth jazz radio stations are long gone. It was between about 2007 and 2009. Again, JJZ dropped it in 06. CD 101.9, I think it was the week after the Patriots-Giants Super Bowl. I guess that was 2008, I'll never forget. They changed format. And these stations going away made me very sad. now there's still the music itself is not dead. There's still Sirius XM Watercolors. There's WXVU. You listen to us on the weekends and nighttime. Lancaster Avenue Oasis. But I wanted to write a book because this was ask anybody who lived around here in the 90s and 2000s, like WJJZ was very popular. It was like people listened to it, the live concerts at Penn's Landing. So I wanted to write a book sort of encompassing why smooth jazz radio was what it was for like 20 years, 1988 to 2008 roughly. It's in, I want to say, the finishing stages, with a book until you actually see it. You got to see it to believe it. But I've talked to a ton of folks who used to work at these stations, program directors, on-air people, a few of the musicians, Brian Simpson, a keyboardist who I just saw in concert. I just talked to for a half hour last week. So I am, again, just to, the uniting theme from this interview, living out your passions. If I'm able to get this book out this year, it would be so incredible. So, because I think smooth jazz radio, I think the people who like it, and still, just with the Berks Jazz Fest up in Reading, that hosts that kind of music every year, there is still a passionate audience for it. Who I have a few YouTube videos up, with air checks, as they're called, of WJJZ. And like every week I get a comment. I remember listening to in my grandma's car, or listening to WJJZ. It takes me right back. I love smooth jazz radio, and so that's what this book is going to be all about. And I thank you for asking about it.
Very cool, very interesting. I'm looking forward to reading it. And
you will get a signed copy. A signed copy.
I'm looking forward to it. Nick, a lot of people say that, radio is dying or declining in interest, especially, among young people. But as WXVU has demonstrated, there is still a strong passion for radio, specifically college radio. What are your thoughts about the current state of radio in this country and around the world?
It's a complicated question. I think it's a very good question. As I talked about earlier, like I remember being your age, mid 2000s, and there were proclamations that radio by where we're sitting now in 2025 would be gone. All these stations, for the most part, are still here. Obviously there's some AM radio has seen a lot of scrutiny lately, just because, in general, studies have found it's a lot of older folks that are still listening to AM radio. Should we even support having AM radio on vehicles, like electric vehicle manufacturers? There's a law that was introduced that has a lot of congressional support that was proposed, AM radio in every vehicle act. So on one hand, this is not a new issue. Where I think radio still shines so much. We'll use the California wildfires as an example. And I've done a few stories I was lucky to do for Radio World about what the stations are doing over there to disseminate emergency alerts, information for evacuees, not just in Los Angeles, but I talked to a market manager, what her stations for Cumulus are doing in Oxnard, Ventura, one of the markets west of Los Angeles. When cellular is out, when, any other, there's still radio as a point-to-point method of getting information from one place to another that you don't have to pay a dime for. To me, that still matters. It is up to the content providers, and this has been the debate for like 25 years, to give people still a reason to listen. Obviously, what has happened is a lot of these companies have incurred a lot of debt, purchasing stations, and as a result, they've had to cut costs, and that's not just a radio thing, but that has hurt the radio industry. So my hope is, when natural disasters happen, and unfortunately that is a part of life, each and every time events like that happen, I feel like radio comes through, and I think it's up to the big companies to withstand, easy for me to say, but, periods of profit loss, to see at the other end when you have local talent. And this all comes at a time when artificial intelligence is here and, has the capability to power shifts on the radio, on the air with an AI voice, which, that's a whole other discussion. But stations even here in Philadelphia, like KYW News Radio and WXBN, how popular that is. I think it still matters when it's locally produced, locally grown. We still see it. And I don't think in even your lifetime, David, that's going to change. But we do need a commitment because, as jobs get eliminated, every time that happens, that is a huge blow to the esteem of the industry, and so I don't have a great solution on how to flush companies with cash, but I do think it's important. The reason why the stations that are still around are successful is because of the live and local element of radio.
To kind of end our conversation, Nick, what are you most excited about for the future of radio and specifically WXVU student radio?
I'll spin it back to the work people like you are doing, and I'm not just saying that, David. Obviously, we hope for some, whether it's the Big East tournament, some bounce back from the basketball teams in March, but each and every time out that I hear you, that I hear Stephen Kane, Dom Ricchetti, each and every member of the WXVU sports team, what MK Kulikin and our exec board is doing, that is exciting to me. When I hear, the voices of tomorrow produce content for us, and it's not something, I think we were at a time at WXVU where it very much had to come from one of us advisors to get things going. Now it's a very much hands-off process. And that's exciting. That's new. That's a breakthrough. And that's a testament to the work of what you all are doing. And for me, it's stories like that. I had the opportunity in November to spend a day down at a high school radio station, WKHS in Maryland, in Kent County, and they, during the day, are staffed by junior and senior high school students.
If you can check out that article. That article is fantastic.
I appreciate the plug. It was a lot of fun to write. So that's exciting, and it gives people that maybe in how they were raised. Obviously, streaming's not going anywhere. Your Spotify Wrapped each year. I know where it's all going. But if students have the opportunity to hone their crafts with what radio offers, and still that live element where, you have to think on the fly. And I think that's something, with the AI debate and, having everything handed to you sort of on a silver platter, that's, very much debated in our society right now. Radio offers an opportunity to have to think on the fly. And so to tie it back to WXVU, to see the projects the sports team is doing, the exec board, they put together a feature we do every Friday called Swingin' Fridays, which features the music of folks like Frank Sinatra, Tony Bennett, Ella Fitzgerald, people like that. For that to be a student-run concept, how awesome is that? So it makes me very happy, very proud, and to feel like I've had a small part of that. So I want to see where you all take it, maybe doing like baseball in the spring, hope for warmer weather, enough of the sub 30 degree days. That makes me very excited, David.
Well, thank you so much for the compliments and support of my work and WXVU as always, Nick. I really appreciate it. Now, before we let you go, because the FCC license or the FCC agents are waiting over there for you, where can people find your work, either on social media or on Radio World? Where can people check out the latest of what you've been writing for Radio World? I
appreciate that. You could just radioworld.com, first of all, look for our stories. Usually I have a couple up, I would say, on a daily basis. On X, I am W2NJL. That's my ham radio call sign. I am a licensed ham radio operator. So I do have a license. Please don't come after me.
This time he does.
That's if I use the phonetic alphabet, it's Whiskey 2 November Juliet Lima. So that's my X handle. And follow me on LinkedIn. David, I'm taking your lead. I always used to be like, self-promotion is terrible. I can't do it. But you know what? You gotta do it. You gotta suck it up. So I post on LinkedIn a lot. look for me, Nick Langan. I usually try to, give my stories a little plug if it's something I feel is cool. And I'm also, when I do something with the Radio Land app, which I'm still very much supporting, we just introduced a feature that maybe two people will find interesting. But in Canada now, you can get these really cool, fancy coverage maps using the Longley-Rice propagation formula. I won't get into it here. But basically, it tells you, if I was in Toronto and I was looking to listen to CHUM, the radio station up there, you could see the signal coverage on a map. I think that's my favorite part of the app. And I even, just to tie it back into student radio, I talked with a student, I believe it's Humber Polytechnic, 96.9. Shout out to Philip at 96.9. He wanted to interview me as part of his class that he's taking in their radio TV program. And he just started his shift at Humber Polytechnic for their radio station. So I don't know. The fact that anybody, here I am, and anybody would want to talk to me for an assignment, like are you crazy? So I feel very grateful. So look me up, LinkedIn, and then radioworld.com, also radiolandapp.com. Chances are, if you just search Nick Langan Radio, there will be a lot of stuff. That's the bottom line.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today, Nick. I really appreciate you sharing your stories about your interest for radio, your passion for jazz music, and like I said, thank you so much for all that you've done for WXVU and student radio, and you've impacted so many people that want to get involved and really develop a true passion for radio.
David, it's a pleasure. I can't wait to see the things you do. I can't imagine Villanova without you, but you'll always be here. But thank you for having me. It's a total honor. It's just great to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nick. And thank you so much to you, the listeners and the viewers out there, for tuning in to today's second episode of the Lancaster Ave Scoop. I'm David Szczepanski. I'll see you in the next episode. Have a great day.